Yeah, just the one,
This one.
big
You got any? Yeah.
Yeah, I got her now.
Personnel, Mike.
Good evening, everyone, and we'll start the meeting as usual. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in the Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So, before we get started, I'd like to welcome Ian here from Upland. And from District 1, we have new councillor Joe McDonald. District 4 is back, Ron Bailey, who was here before, he's back again. And District 7, Donnie Parker. So we'd like to welcome you fellows to your first official meeting in this chamber, I believe. So, thank you. Item number 3, correction or omissions from the minutes of April 29th, 24. Any corrections or omissions? Any corrections or omissions? Seeing no corrections or omissions, I'll approve the minutes as read. So item 4, we'll get right at it. Ian, you can take over from here. And I must ask, when we're going through this, do you want questions at the time, or would you rather it at the end?
Yeah, thank you. I think we can take questions throughout, so they're topical, and we'll keep it pretty informal.
Good, thank you.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name's Ian Watson. I'm a senior planner with Upland Planning and Design, and we're working with your municipality to develop a new municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. And we are at the exciting milestone where we have drafts, public drafts available. And we wanted to take tonight to go through highlights of those drafts and what you can expect from them, and what you might be asked questions about from your constituents, and also talk a little bit about next steps and what you can expect for the next couple months. So I also note that we have a couple new councillors, so I'm going to do I know you may have actually just had with Municipal Affairs a presentation on planning. I will give a quick Planning 101 just to bring everybody up to speed, make sure we're all on the same page. Apologies for the old hats who have heard this. All right, I don't have control over this. Next slide. So just over the next couple of weeks, you're going to be seeing a bunch of us here for engagement. So you can expect to see some of these faces. Next slide. So what is this Imagine MOPC project as it's branded? So as I mentioned, it's a project to develop a new municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. Currently, your municipality has no land use planning, except for there's a wind energy bylaw and a subdivision bylaw. So in 2018, the provincial government passed the minimum planning standards regulations, basically saying that all municipalities and all areas of every municipality had to be planned in Nova Scotia, and that those plans need to meet minimum standards. And it's fairly flexible on how you meet those minimum standards. You can make a plan that works for you. And so the fundamental point of the Imagine MOPC project is to meet that minimum planning requirement, but it's also an opportunity to talk about what you want for your future. Next slide. So, keep myself up. Right now, the municipality is unplanned and it's grown organically, but we've seen population pressures in Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada over the past couple of years, and that's raised the need for planning. And a project like this is also an opportunity to for residents to have their say, to speak about municipal issues and what their community should look like. And right now in MOPC, anything goes, for better or for worse. Then if you're on one hand, it's really easy to do anything if you're opening a business or want to build a new home or whatever. On the other hand, if someone wants to, they can come in and open a glue factory in your backyard, and there's no rules to say anything otherwise. So depending on your perspective, the lack of planning is good or bad. Next. Some key goals that were set out with this council at the very start of the project were to recognize the unique fabric of Pictou County and the municipality, and ensure that planning documents are reflective of your community's needs, and to take a light touch. We recognize, the municipality's got along without planning up until this point, and there are some land use conflicts and challenges that need to be addressed, but we're not here to overregulate, and I think that's reflected in the drafts. The land use bylaw, when you strip out the The definitions section, the actual land use bylaw, is 35 pages. It's compare that to just the bylaw for the Peninsula of Halifax at 200. So we've tried to be efficient. We've tried to tackle what matters and give some space around the things that maybe we don't need to touch. And the project was set up to be an opportunity for residents to give their feedback and shape these documents. Next slide. So as I mentioned, going to take a quick step back and do what is land use planning. It's a collaborative process to help you, your citizens, business owners, envision a common future for your community. And then carry that out through how land is used, how and where growth and development happens, and how and where buildings are built. The quote I always use is, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. The time marches on, change happens. We can either shape that change, or we can let it happen to us. Next slide. More fundamentally, or I guess more specifically, we plan to support our community's character, culture, and identity, identify the things that are important to us and that make us who we are, and enshrine those in our documents. Next slide. We plan to prepare for change, whether that's climate change, eroding cliffs, bigger floods, or demographic change, or economic change. Next slide. We prepare for our environment, or we plan for our environments, protecting sensitive environments, areas where development could irreparably damage places. Or on the flip side, we also think about how our environment affects our development, whether that's floodplains or erodible areas or areas that are otherwise hazardous. We plan for resource development, things like agriculture, forestry, mining. They take up large areas of land and they need space to do what they need to do. And when other land uses come in and conflict with that, it can be hard for these industries to exist. So making sure that there's a place for these activities in our communities. Next slide. We plan for infrastructure and to use it efficiently. Things like roads, sewer, water, they're your biggest line items in your municipal budget. And they're important to our communities, they're essential, but at the same time we want to make sure we're getting the best value for our dollar and building our communities in ways that take advantage of these services where we've spent that money. Next slide. Kind of the roots of planning is where planning got its start in North America is the idea of separating incompatible land uses. You might have had the day where you lived in a community and you lived in the factory town, your job was around the corner, and you walk to work, but these days not everyone wants to have a factory in their backyard, even if we benefit from what they produce. Similarly to a chicken barn, a lot of us take advantage of what they provide, but we don't necessarily want to live next to one. And then on the other side of that, and this hasn't been an issue in Pictou because you haven't had planning, but in a lot of communities in North America, we've gone too far with that whole idea of separating everything. And places like downtown River John, you can't develop them in a lot of North America, or have gardens in your backyard or whatever it is. So a lot of the discussion in planning now is how do we take that light touch and step back a little bit, mix things up a little bit. And then really specifically here, in Nova Scotia, we have our toolbox, which is the Municipal Government Act. It's what we use as planners and municipalities to do our job. It sets out what we can and cannot regulate and what we have to regulate. With that, we build the blueprint for the community, which is the municipal planning strategy. And it is a higher level document. It talks about the vision. It talks about the background of how we got to where we are today. It gives context for the decisions that we make about land use planning. And it has high level policies that guide council in making decisions about planning. Out of that, we build the land use bylaw, which is the rules and regulations. It's the tool that your staff will use when people come to check if they can build an apartment building. The land use bylaw is what they'll look at to say, oh yeah, that's allowed, and give you a permit or not, or the standards that you have to meet. It's the zoning, it's the regulations. And the key thing is that the bylaw has to agree with the plan, and the plan has to be consistent with the act. And so how that plays out in reality, for example, might be something like the Municipal Government Act says a municipal planning strategy must contain statements of policy with respect to housing. Then the municipal planning strategy will say something about how you want to enable housing in your municipality. And then the land use bylaw will actually carry that out through the zones that you establish and the types of uses that are permitted in those zones. And then one key thing with this is that in that Municipal Government Act, there are five, well, there's six, but one's specific to Halifax. So there are 5 statements of provincial interest that are relevant to you as a municipality. These are things, and they're fairly high level, but they are things that municipal plans must embody in the documents. So there's a statement of provincial interest on drinking water and protecting our drinking water supplies. There's a statement of provincial interest on agricultural lands, and it says that plans must identify good agricultural land, and that's done by soil classification, which has its challenges because not all good soils are in good places for farming. But we have to identify those good soils, and we have to take measures to protect them from development. And what that looks like varies from community to community and relative to the importance of agriculture in the provincial context. We must, there's a statement of provincial interest on floodplains. We must limit development in the floodplains of certain mapped rivers that were mapped in the 60s, 70s, and 80s across Canada as part of a flood damage reduction program. One of those rivers is in Pictou County, which is East River. So there are specific requirements related to East River that we must carry out through our planning documents. And then we also have to have certain restrictions, requirements for flood proofing and prohibitions on certain types of uses in other known floodplains. And so currently, in terms of the provincial interpretation of that, there's one known floodplain on the River John. And so there are certain restrictions that go with that, though they don't really affect much land. And I'll get to that later tonight. There's a statement of provincial interest on housing, which basically says we have to enable a diversity of housing options and some specific things related to manufactured housing. And finally, there's a statement of provincial interest on infrastructure that basically our planning documents have to encourage good use of sustainable use of infrastructure. Next slide. So this comes up, and I put this slide in more for the public because this comes up a lot at public meetings, but it's helpful to highlight here too, is that we are constrained by that toolbox as municipalities and as planners. So it says the things that we can regulate, but we don't have to. And that, as part of taking that light touch with the documents, we've chosen not to regulate some of those things here in MOPC. But some of the things we can regulate are things like lot standards, how big a lot has to be, building placement on lots, building size, the uses permitted of land, that's a big one, it's called the land use bylaw. Things like signage, parking requirements, topsoil removal, a whole bunch of things that we can regulate if we want to, and it carries out our vision as a community. Perhaps more importantly, I think, are the things we cannot regulate. And this is the one, I make this list because these come up a lot in public meetings. This is obviously not an exhaustive list, but these are the ones we commonly hear about. We cannot regulate resource activities. We do not regulate farming itself. We don't regulate where you let your cows pasture or the crops that you plant in your backyard. We don't. We don't regulate the clearing of trees for forestry. We don't regulate mining or fishing. We can regulate things related to those, things like where it's appropriate to have a sawmill or a fish processing plant, but not the resource activity itself.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna be regulations for, whether people can build and what the house is gonna be like or whatever, right?
Peter, use your mic, please.
So, if someone just goes, I'm putting a house there anyway, I'm gonna buy a house somewhere, I'm gonna move it there, and I'm gonna put it in there, what can we do about it?
Yeah, so that's always a big question in planning is the enforcement side of things. It's one thing to have rules, and it's another thing to enforce them. And it's a question I ask myself a lot when we are writing rules: is are we prepared to enforce this? Because if we're not, why do we have it? The Municipal Government Act does give municipalities powers to enforce on people who are in contravention of the land use bylaw. It's a bit of a process. It starts with putting a stop work order on them collecting evidence. If you really have to, you can take them to court. You can force them to tear it down if you really have to. Hopefully it doesn't ever get to that point. Most people are reasonable. They do things accidentally, and when they're, when it's brought to their attention, they'll remedy it. If they're not, so yeah, sometimes you have to go that route. But there are tools. They take time, and they take effort, and so it is a useful thought process to think about: are we prepared to enforce X when we go through things?
Because I turn around and gentleman just passed away. Well, he's passed away now, but I know he just took his house, put it over there, and he said, let them try and stop me, and nobody ever did, because nobody's going to go in where he lived to turn around and try and stop him. But I'm just wondering how that's going to work.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, this is a choice for you as a council, but it's typical for municipalities to be complaint-based in the sense that I don't know too many municipal staff who like to drive around and find infractions for the sake of finding infractions, and certainly that comes, it's a direction that's set by a council, but yeah, usually if it's a situation where it's not bothering anyone and no one complains, who is going to catch that, and that's the reality of it. So yeah, some other things we don't regulate or cannot regulate as municipalities is land below the ordinary high water mark. So then you're getting into provincial and then federal jurisdiction. We don't regulate people. And that includes renters versus owners, locals versus come from aways, any of those distinctions, we don't regulate through municipal planning documents. And we don't regulate motor vehicles or things to do with speed limits or potholes or all of those things through these planning documents. I think planning is fundamentally a collaborative process with council, staff, PAC, especially residents. And then the province at the end of it, ultimately these documents will go to the minister for review against those statements of provincial interest. So this is something important to highlight. In Nova Scotia, we have this concept of non-conforming structures and uses. And that sounds like a bad thing, you're non-conforming. It's actually a good thing from a landowner perspective. Non-conforming structures and uses is a protection that is in the Municipal Government Act for things that legally existed before you put in rules or change rules. Sometimes you hear it called grandfathering. So the documents that we're talking about today will apply to new development going forward. We're not going back retroactively and saying, oh, you have that house, now you're zoned commercial, you can't have that house anymore.
What do you mean by legally existing, non-conforming? What do you mean by that? What does that look like?
So there's two situations. One is, and this is your case, there was no rules prior. So realistically, most things would probably be considered legal. I can't think of a situation where anything that exists now would not be considered legal under municipal planning because you didn't have any. In a lot of other cases, it's a situation where you have planning and then you change the rules, but I built my house legally under the old rules and you went and changed them on me now, I'm still protected. So if you are legally non-conforming, so if you existed prior under no rules or existing rules, and those get changed, you are protected by the Municipal Government Act. You can keep doing what you're doing. There may be restrictions on if you can expand, or in some instances, if a non-conforming structure, say it's built way too close to the road by modern standards and it burns down, there may be, depending on what type of use it is, there may be requirements to rebuild in the new location. But as long as you keep doing what you're doing, you are protected. And that's a double-edged sword in the sense that we are, respecting the good faith investments that people made in their land and protecting those. But there are cases where there's existing land use conflicts and these new documents will not go back and fix that because they are non-conforming, which is the other edge of the sword. Though what it does do, so for example, if you have a non-conforming use, say a non-conforming scrapyard, you're allowed to keep doing what you're doing, but if you ever shut down and cease operations for a certain period of time, it's 6 months under the Act. I think we kept it at that. I'd have to go back and check in these documents. After that 6 months, then you lose your non-conforming status. So you can't go say, oh, there was a scrapyard or a gas station or whatever there 5 years ago, I want to reopen it. That status is gone. So it doesn't shut down the existing operations, but it can prevent them from reopening in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide. Another, I think, important point in all of this is that planning documents are dynamic. Just like anybody's a business owner, you write your business plan, you don't write it and then never change anything for the next 10 years. You come back to it annually or semi-annually or whatever, and update as necessary to reflect the things that have changed. Planning documents are not set in stone. They are meant to change over time and respond to evolving needs and contexts. And they are reviewed on a periodic basis formally, like you have to every 10 years under the minimum planning regulations, review these documents in full. You're encouraged to do it more often, to do housekeeping, that kind of thing. And also, now that you have planning documents, you will occasionally get applications to change these documents and have to go through a thought process of whether that makes sense. And so there is an opportunity, just because things are one way now, to change them if they don't work for someone. So, in terms of where we are in the process, we launched this project last summer. We went through engagement about this time last year, or fall last year, and then have been drafting the documents since, I guess early 2024, we had a workshop in here to kind of discuss the direction of the documents and review what we heard in the initial engagement. Then we went and drafted documents. Obviously, the municipal elections happened, and that kind of made it hard to do anything publicly, so things put a pin in things for a little bit. But now that that's behind us, we're here with these drafts, ready to do draft engagement with the public. This says end of 2024, and I think that's our current timeline. It's going to be tight, and there may be a need to request an extension from the province on the timeline. But the goal is to have these documents in place very shortly. So to date, in this project, we did a fair bit of background research and analysis, had the project launch with newsletter spreads, public surveys. Many of you attended community meetings throughout the municipality. There was an online mapping activity. As I mentioned, we summarized all that engagement results, brought it here, and had a policy discussion with you as a council of where we wanted to go with these documents before we started writing them. And then once we had good, clear direction, we started drafting. So the end result of that is two new planning documents, as I mentioned, the municipal planning strategy, the high-level policy document, and then the land use bylaw, which is the regulations. And it's really kind of broken up into 5 main topics in the plan, in the municipal planning strategy: housing, agriculture, environment, recreation, tourism and transportation, and economic development. And that's what I'm going to go through tonight. So the plan tonight is to kind of hit the highlights. This is obviously not every little detail of these documents, though we have tried to keep them fairly light. So this is really hitting a lot of it. Certainly happy to, the idea is to give you a high-level picture of what you can expect in these and what you're going to be hearing about in the next couple of weeks when you talk to your communities. If you want to delve deeper into a topic tonight, let me know and we can do that. So the first thing, I guess fundamentally, is that these planning documents divide the community into zones. It's a pretty fundamental planning concept. You know, I'm zoned residential, I'm zoned commercial, whatever it may be. We've, again, tried to keep it fairly straightforward when it comes to zoning. And
Just for a second.
yeah,
Page 17 is where this is at.
yes. So the zones are the commercial recreation zone, which accommodates commercial recreation operations, as the name would suggest, things like golf courses, campgrounds, drive-in theaters. The community core zone. So I should say a fundamental kind of way we've divided up the community is whether an area is sewer serviced or not. And so the community core zone, because the main thing is sewer allows for denser development. You can have smaller lot sizes because you don't need to have an on-site septic. So the community core zone encourages mixed-use development in sewer service communities. So that's things like downtown River John, areas where there's housing.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just, some of us have the bylaw and some of us have.
I think the bylaws
strategy.
went out
You
into
off
the
the bylaw
package.
one?
So this is kind of, yeah, so there is this table of all the zones, and it is in the municipal planning strategy.
Yeah, that's one that's on page 17.
Yeah, 17 of the municipal planning strategy.
Did you have the other
But
hard
the
copy
one on
printed out?
the-
Okay, so it's on your iPad.
On the bylaw is, what page?
Yeah, so in the bylaw,
So the bylaw was what was printed out, but,
oh, okay, gotcha.
so, and given to everybody last Wednesday night.
Okay.
So it's the strategy that you want, which is on your iPads, right?
Yeah, strategy is on
Strategy
the-
is on your iPads.
One that I had at home was strategy.
Okay, some of you got strategy, some got bylaw, did they, Shelley, or? The green one? It was all the green one?
So everybody has the plan printed out.
That's the strategy one?
Yeah.
And the
That's-
bylaw is blue.
And the bylaw is blue.
Okay. So,
In the bylaw, it's on page 26.
okay.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Logan. Yeah, that's right. Page 26.
Okay, we're all on the same page?
All
We
on the
can go
same
ahead.
pages. So the residential community zone is also for sewer service communities, but it's mainly restricted to residential uses. So it's for those areas of the communities that are very residential in nature and are intended, expected to kind of stay that way. The comprehensive development district zone is for large properties that you might want to develop in a comprehensive manner, where you might want to look at new roads, sewer, where there might need to be the consideration of existing challenges, maybe environmental remediation or something like that. Basically, it's large strategic properties where there's going to be a council process to review what happens on them in the future. The conservation zone is to identify protected lands that are not otherwise captured by other protective zoning. So mainly it applies to provincial wilderness areas, which they're protected anyways. It's more of a communications piece. Similarly, beaches, they're also protected in other ways, but the conservation zone kind of mirrors that and protects them. The floodway zone, as I mentioned, or I kind of alluded to, is it limits development within the 1 in 20-year floodplain of East River. The general commercial zone is to accommodate a wide range of commercial uses. The highway commercial zone is to accommodate commercial uses specifically at highway interchanges and set aside those lands for, it's a limited resource in the sense that there's only so many highway interchanges. So to set aside those lands for uses that serve the traveling public or benefit strongly from close access to highway infrastructure. The industrial land, as the name suggests, identifies and accommodates industrial properties. The institutional similarly identifies institutional properties, and we've taken the approach where institutional uses are permitted in a lot of zones. Schools are permitted in residential zones, parks. So not every institutional property has a institutional zone on it. It's more for those ones that are expected to stay that way long term, things like fire stations. But you might have churches, for example, that are in other zones and are not zoned institutional. Parks and open space identifies and protects provincial municipal parks and open space properties. Again, they have other protections. It's more about clearly communicating their intent to the public. The rural commercial zone, maybe I'll skip ahead. The rural general zone is a mixed-use zone that reflects the rural areas of much of the municipality. It's by and large the dominant zone in this document. When you look at the zoning map, it applies to most areas of the municipality. It's fairly flexible in what it allows. There are some more intensive commercial uses that aren't outright permitted in that zone, and that's why we have the rural commercial zone that considers some of those more intensive commercial uses in the rural areas. And then finally, we have the shoreline zone, which is for around the lakes and on private road subdivisions along the marine coast. And it has larger lot standards and has some restrictions on uses in terms of protecting the future quality of the waters that it's next to. So that's kind of the high-level framework. At the back of the land use bylaw, there is a...
Second, we have a question from the warden, please.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Warden. So under shoreline, I
Yes.
read that through on the weekend, and, you know, there is the controversy with the provincial government having said to the municipalities or individuals that you look after it.
Yes.
We're not going to do that. We're withdrawing from whatever that plan was that was agreed to by everybody, I guess, at one time, or all three parties. Does this address that in any way, or is this more meant for along lakes and rivers? I'm just wondering, we as a council at some point are going to have to decide whether we want to get involved in this whole Coastal Protection Act thing or not. Does this address that, or sort of skip around it?
Yeah, thank you, Warden. Not directly. So and I'll touch on this in a little bit later. We have established some water course setbacks, mostly for erosion purposes, and also to protect the sensitive edges of water bodies. So there are water course setbacks established in the bylaw, which I'll touch on in a little bit. We don't have anything directly for sea level rise currently in this draft. You're right, it was going to be a provincially wide initiative at one point that got formally scuttled earlier this year. The province is, and actually I'm working on this, the province is currently doing a project to develop example policy and text that municipalities can incorporate into their planning documents if they so choose. So we're working on that right now, and we'll be that's a resource that's to be made available to municipalities in the near future. So it will be something that you'll have at your disposal if you want to work it into your planning documents in the future.
So we could add it at a later date, what you're saying?
Yeah.
But it is an if you so choose thing and not a shall thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to go topic by topic, and I don't have specific references to the planning documents for these because I'm jumping around a little bit. I've grouped it by topic just to give you an overview, but certainly can dig in deeper into the planning documents themselves if any of these topics pique your curiosity. So one of the key topics we heard about was, of course, housing. That's probably no surprise. Hearing challenges about rental options, acquiring housing, cost of housing, seniors and young people finding it difficult to meet their housing needs, amongst other people. And I think when we were talking back in earlier this year, some of the key directions were to address housing challenges while preserving neighborhood character, enable diverse housing options, support sustainable housing initiatives, and permitting accessory dwellings on residential properties. So how we actually turn that into policy, or in draft policy and regulations, is we've taken a fairly flexible approach to housing and enabling dwellings at various scales throughout the municipality. So the shoreline zone, where it's into more sensitive areas, allowing 2 units per lot. In the rural general, 4, and then in any other zone that permits residential uses, that includes the community core, community residential, institutional, I believe, commercial recreation, even the general commercial, allowing up to 8 units per lot as of right, just permitted in those zones. and then there's a process for considering more than 8 units per lot through a development agreement. We also treat supportive housing options, things like small options homes, residential care facilities, that kind of thing, the same as any other residential use of the same scale. And that's actually one of those things that the provincial statement of housing touches on, is needing to treat those the same as anything else.
On the housing one, because it's been very controversial in other municipalities, the homeless shelters that we have one in Glasgow here, but so part of the solution to that, the government's recommended, is these pallet homes and other, so you get a community of, one in Cape Breton, I know was quite controversial, where there was 30, 40, 50 or whatever pallet homes going up, and one community didn't want it, and they moved it to another one, they didn't want it, and, so if that were to come up here, the idea that somewhere in the county, they're gonna put up 50 pallet homes, does this address that? Does it allow for that, or how's that fit in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I think to date, a lot of the pallet home projects have been provincial initiatives. And if that's the case, if it was a situation where it's a provincially owned project, the province isn't bound by municipal planning. So they create the Municipal Government Act. They can overrule you on that if they so choose. So, if it's a provincial project, no, it doesn't necessarily address that. If it is a private project that's kind of mimicking, or if it's a nonprofit project or somebody that's not the province, that's kind of taking a similar approach, they would indeed be bound by the zoning. And then in that case, if, depending on where, what the situation was, if it was up to 8 units, it'd probably be permitted, depending on the zone. But if it was more than 8, if it was 60 or 64 or whatever it is, there is a pathway to consider that through a development agreement, but it is a council process. There's a review process that comes to Planning Advisory Committee and to you as a council, and there's a public component to that process. So there'll be an opportunity to review the particulars of any of those proposals and regulate them through the development agreement, which is a one-off contract, basically, for that development. So you could put bounds around it, or if it was found to be wildly incompatible with the plan, you could turn it down as well.
Okay, so there's big neighborhood protests over what you're trying to do, much like they had in Glasgow with the seniors homes and whatnot, then you could turn it down based on the feelings of the people then.
Well, so the thing with this is something I think will be a learning process for the municipality as you start to deal with planning, having planning documents, but any of these discretionary planning processes, rezonings or development agreements, absolutely, you can turn them down as a council. It has to be on the basis of the plan. And there is a policy at the end of the plan that says council shall not approve one of these if it's premature on the basis of traffic, environmental issues, whatever, there's a whole list of things. So you do have the ability to turn things down if there is a legitimate need to, and that need is not just those people don't want it. It has to be tied to those policies, or else you go to the Utility and Review Board and get appealed. So as a council, as you start to go through these rezonings and go through development agreements, the policy is there if you need to lean on it to make sure that a project meets the need of the community, but you do need to be careful to put it in the terms of those policies and not just we don't want it.
Yeah, thank you.
If that makes sense.
Okay, here we got a list of councillors here who want to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
add. Logan, did you want to add something to that before councillors ask the question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Deputy. Just further to what you was saying, in the event that a development comes in, and I think your question, Warden, is related to if a developer comes in and thinks that what they're doing is within the rules that we have established, do we have a right to turn them down if there's a big public outcry? But if a development, like people may have heard the term like as of right, different things like that is referred to in a lot of different areas. If a development meets all these different requirements under our rules and doesn't require a development agreement, like Ian's saying. A development agreement needs to have buy-in from council. A zoning change needs to have buy-in from council, because you're essentially either in a development agreement making a new plan for a specific site, or you're changing our plan that we have here via a rezoning. So if you go down the road of denying a development agreement or a zoning, you can base that on what Ian's saying, which is that it doesn't really agree with our policy. It's, you know, on a discretionary basis. But if you start turning down developments that are, you know, appear to be within the rules and meeting all the checklists in our document, then you run the risk of developers coming after the municipality and saying, hey, we put a lot of money into planning this and, you know, developing this project. You know, you could actually be taken to court for that. It's been done in the province. So just, we can't just deny an application because there's a big public outcry in some situations where they feel like they've done it. That's why we need to be careful planning aspects. It's not to freak everybody out or anything, but it's just, you can correct me if I'm wrong on anything.
No, yeah, Logan has it exactly right. So, you know, there are, if you go to the land use bylaw on pages 28 through 30, there are tables that list what's permitted in a zone. If it's permitted, if it has a P in that table, the person just, it's what Logan said, it's as of right. You know, if someone comes in, they meet the standards of the land use bylaw, staff give them a permit and off they go. That's it. Also in that table are uses that are highlighted with a DA, and that's that development agreement piece. So those are the ones that come to council. Those are the ones that there's some discretion in how you apply those policies and make decisions, and there's a public element to that. So, you know, as you're reviewing these documents over the next couple months, and as we're out talking in the public, it would be a good use of your time, I think, to take a look at those 4 pages of tables and make sure that the things that you want permitted are permitted, and the things that you are concerned about or have worries about are either, you know, flagged as something that maybe we should have a discretionary process, and we can have a discussion at a later date about the consequences of that and what that means in terms of timelines and resources and all that kind of thing. But, you know, flag some of those things that might be of concern, and we can talk about whether there should be a discretionary process for them, or even just not, you know, straight up not permit them in a certain zone. Would certainly be a good use of your time, I think, as a council. And then the other one to look at, just when you're thinking about that, is on the planning side, way at the back, policy, I guess it's section 4.4, policy 419. It is that list of criteria that if you ever get one, or when you get one of these rezoning or development agreement applications, it's the criteria that you're going to look at to say this makes sense or no, it doesn't. So just take a look at that to put in your mind of like, oh, what is that thought process that we're going to be going through when we evaluate one of these discretionary applications, and, you know, some of the reasons you might turn something down.
Okay, Councillor Darla McKeel.
Thank you very much, Deputy Warden. Through you, I'd like to ask a question to Ian. I just want some clarity on, excuse me, on the units. So by units, flexible approach, 2 units per shoreline zone. So is that 2 dwellings, 2 units? Does that mean like a town, like a townhouse that has like 2 sides to it? Like what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, thank you, through the Deputy Warden. So we've taken a fairly flexible approach in this, in that it's the number of units on a lot, and how you configure that is kind of up to you. It could be over under 2 units, it could be 2 separate buildings, it could be
So we
side
don't
by
define
side.
unit.
A dwelling, we do define dwelling unit as like, as a self-contained living quarters with a kitchen, bath, and so that's how you count them. But how you configure them is kind of up to you, your needs. So in the shoreline zone, you could have 2. However, in the rural general zone, you could have 4. It could be 4 separate buildings. It could be a 4-plex. It could be 2 duplexes.
Okay.
We've been fairly flexible in how things get arranged. And then so some of those, like larger housing developments in the sense of like bare land condominiums, for example. You see these in rural areas sometimes where it's all in one lot, but it's structured legally as a condominium. Then yeah, there's a situation where you may have multiple buildings, each one unit, but there's a whole bunch of them on one lot. And so this approach also enables that sort of thing too.
Okay, so like in the rural general zone, which you said is most of the municipality.
Yeah.
So technically on a lot, a building lot, I could have up to 4 units on that lot as long as they're all complicit with our building bylaws and everything else. And
Yeah, and they meet the setbacks and that we've established.
environmental for sewer and all that
Exactly.
stuff. As long as they're meeting all those requirements, we can have up to 4 units on each
Lot.
lot.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wadden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I could, through you to Logan, he might be able to best answer this. I'm just wondering if this is in line with our subdivision policy. And I'm just thinking of the example down home where they have 19 lots as opposed to the 8. Is that something like that be able to help if we're trying to change the development down there?
Yeah, sorry, my mic's not working.
Looking at the subdivision possibly then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Councillor Turner?
Councilor Keel asked that question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dorr?
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Going back to something you said a few minutes ago, and we got to remember our residents, and if they don't want it, it shouldn't be happening. So that should be part of the process, right? And you already said, well, no, if this zone, this way, they're the people paying the bill, so they should have the right to say, well, I don't mean 10 or 12 people against 40 or 100 that want it, but if everybody, the consensus is, if we fill this room, it would be just the same as the noise bylaw years ago here. We filled this place, filled the other place, it didn't happen, right? So there's no need of none of us being here if we're not going to listen to our people, okay? So you got to fit something in for the residents on every one of them. That they, you know, they're not going to come in here about everything, but they're certainly going to come here about some things. And I guess likely at the very first of the term, you can do pretty well whatever you want. This should have all been done right now at election time, and they likely would have threw the whole thing out. Thank you.
Any further questions at this time? Councillor Palmer, go ahead.
Just on that 4 units per lot for rural general zone. I'm just thinking about fossil farms, okay? They get 5 or 6 or 8 units down there where they rent out as like on a nightly basis. Now, would they not be allowed to have more than 4 if this regulation goes through? Like, it's one lot. They put these there. It's like individual units per lot, right? Or per unit. So there's, right now, I think there's 8 there. So under this bylaw, or under this draft policy, would they be allowed?
Yeah, through the deputy warden. So we would, certainly the world of Airbnb and all that has made it blurred the line between accommodations and dwellings. But for the purposes of this bylaw, we would consider that to be accommodations.
Combination.
Accommodations, which doesn't have a cap on units. And that accommodations are permitted in the rural general zone. We haven't restricted them in any way. Yeah, so there is a funny blurry line there that's made regulation challenging now that people are renting out what are otherwise homes for accommodations, but they would be okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, that was one thing. And one more question, if I may.
Go ahead.
We talked about if a developer comes here and they meet all the criterias, but if they meet all the criterias, but they're in a rezoning area.
Yep.
Rezoning, we could deny it under that rezoning because of, it's not the purpose of that area.
Yeah, through you, Deputy Warden. Yeah, so there's those tables on page 28, 29, 30. So let's say I want to open Ian's millwrights. I want to, if I'm in a residential zone, the residential community zone, light industrial is not a permitted use. So I could not get a permit in the in the residential community zone for that use. I could apply to you as a council to change that zone. It
But
would be
we
a
could
public
deny that.
process, and you could certainly deny that on the basis that that is not compatible with the residential uses around it. On the flip side, if I wanted to open that business in the industrial zone, that's a permitted use there. I would just come, I would get my permit,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, when it comes down to rezoning, if you have to rezone.
Yeah,
then-
that is a
then
council
we could-
process.
Done. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor McDonald.
Through you, Chair. Just wondering about the shoreline zones and the residential zones and that stuff. Is there a different size limitations and that stuff? Like, you said 2 per shoreline
Yeah.
property, and then you said 4 or 8 or something, the other ones?
Yeah.
Is there a size differential,
On the units themselves?
or the area that they, minimum lot size?
Yeah, so there is a table on page 31 of the land use bylaw that has minimum lot sizes. In most zones, in most unserviced zones, we've set it at 2,700 square meters, which is the lowest you can go with an on-site septic, basically. The only place where we change that is in the shoreline zone, where we have a minimum lot size of 5,000 square meters. The idea, again, is to keep the density a little lower around water bodies where, overdevelopment can basically lead to the damage of those water bodies. There are smaller lot sizes in the sewer serviced areas because you don't need on-site septic. It's expected that things will be closer together. But by and large, in most of the municipality, the minimum lot size per our standards would be 2,700 square meters, and might be larger when you go to Nova Scotia Environment and dig your test pit and find out that you need more lot size to get your septic. But
Okay, that good? Councillor Don Parker.
Mr. Chair, through you to the speaker there, there's a lady out in District 7, she built a couple cabins, she rents them out, and would she be allowed to build, say, 4 more cabins on her property? It's in a very rural zone.
through you, Mr. Chair, assuming it's rural general, accommodations are permitted there. There's no limit on the number.
Yeah, no, it's rural general for sure.
Yeah, so then she'd be fine.
All right, thank you.
All right. And the one other thing I'll add on, in addition to Logan's earlier comments, is that part of our scope is to provide some recommendations for the subdivision bylaw. And I know private roads is, Logan and I have been talking about that issue a little bit, so you can expect some thoughts on that. Okay, agriculture. So what we heard, farmers want protection of agricultural land while maintaining freedom to operate their business how they please. Fair enough. We're seeing increased land use conflicts. You have people, especially over the last couple of years, with remote work, moving to more rural areas, and then finding out that life happens. And there's manure, there's noise, there's all those things. So there's potential conflicts there. And then one of the things we heard too is, the need to continue to engage with the farming community, especially because the local area does not have a chapter in the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture. So I think when we discussed this back earlier this year, there's a desire to protect agricultural land and identify high-value agricultural soils and widely permit agricultural uses. But when we did discuss it, there wasn't a desire to establish a separate agricultural zone or anything like that. So what we have proposed in the drafts, and again, reminding that municipal planning documents do not regulate agricultural activities, is to widely permit agritourism and agricultural related uses. This is a bit of a tautology I've written here, but except in zones intended to implement more restrictive land use controls. But basically saying in the rural zones, unless it's a conservation zone or a floodplain zone or the residential community zone, widely permit agritourism and agriculture related uses. So not restrict that agricultural activity or agricultural related activity. In compliance with that statement of provincial interest, we have a agricultural soils overlay. So it's not a zone, it's just a separate map that identifies high value agricultural soils, and within those areas prohibits topsoil removal. Other than that, we do not have a specific agricultural zone. Which has pluses or minuses in terms of there aren't many restrictions on, other uses that might potentially conflict with agriculture. You can still buy up land next to an agricultural activity and build a house under the current proposed draft. But the flip side is that also a farmer, as part of their, for example, retirement plans, can also lean on their land as a potential asset. Farm, fish, and forestry stalls, this is a little thing, but those end of the road stalls that people sell things at, we want to clearly recognize them and exempt them from permit requirements. They're just part of what happens. We recognize farmers markets specifically as a land use and permit it in many zones. The one thing, in terms of agriculture and potential for conflict, a big one is livestock operations, the chicken barns, that kind of thing. They are permitted straight up in the rural general zone. There are there's larger setbacks than other uses from property lines to give a little space between them and other activities. And some minor setbacks from water courses and offsite wells. These are similar to I know there's lots of restrictions on agriculture through provincial regulations. This is more of kind of a mirroring of that. That's not intended to be stricter than what you could expect from the provincial regulations.
Just a question from the warden here,
Yeah.
please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Warden. Agriculture was what blew up the last plan.
Yeah.
And I know people don't like me bringing this up, but it's real. And it could do the same this time. The potential is there. The farming community is still very, very reluctant to hear the word planning.
Yeah.
I got my job to do. I'm struggling to make a living here. I don't need somebody to tell me what to do. We need to be prepared for that, but what I'm hearing you say is that there's no restriction. If I wanted to go into pigs, not much money there, but if I wanted to go into pigs, and there was a fairly amount of homes around, and I'm going to spread my manure on those fields. I wasn't there before. They came first. Now I'm coming in as a farmer and saying I'm going to put a pig farm here. That's where all hell breaks loose, because I spent a lot of money to build my fancy home here and whatnot, and now it's always been looked at that whoever came first. If the pig farm was there first and you built your house there, well, too bad for you. But if there's 20 nice homes in a neighborhood somewhere and there's lots of field there and everything, and somebody decides they're going to build a pig farm there, that's where the real controversy comes and says, why can't you fellows do something about this? So I don't think the farming community is so concerned about, that situation as they are the opposite situation. And the residents, if there isn't any protection from somebody putting a pig farm there, you know, or they're gonna wonder why that isn't in our plan, that the farmer was allowed to stick that right in the middle of, you know, downtown, Scottsburn, let's say, where there's a lot of homes around, or downtown Plymouth or anywhere. So I wonder, I'm certainly in favor of not restricting farmers too much. And I'm certainly largely in favor of the one about, the topsoil, that we should not be taking good topsoil and putting it in town for people's lawns. But the one about, you know, a farm going in where there's already housing, I think has to be, looked at very closely.
Thank you, Warden. Yeah, and so the large-scale livestock operations would just, they'd only be the rural general zone, but granted, that is a large part of the municipality. What we heard in talking to the agricultural community is there's, you know, anything you do here is just on top of existing provincial regulations, that there's a lot already in terms of manure management guidelines and all of those things. But it is, yeah, this may be something we hear about as through this engagement, and certainly as we come back to refine the next draft, if that's an important topic for this council, I think we can and should absolutely discuss that.
Thank you. Just on the prohibiting the sale of topsoil, who's that gonna impact around here? Like, there's people out there doing that business now? Like, and people do need topsoil, right? Where are people supposed to get this stuff? It doesn't come out of the sky.
Yeah, it's one of those ones that's challenging to enforce. It's true. Does need to come from somewhere, but it's I think that's. There's no ability to do that currently in the draft. It's just a blanket prohibition on removing good agricultural soils. I think we'll hear about this as part of the engagement as agricultural issues in general. And I probably flag agriculture as one of our future discussions as we get into the next draft and reflect on what we hear during the engagement. But it's certainly one of those ones where we're in a challenging situation where there's a clear statement of provincial interest on protection of agricultural land specifically. But as the warden mentions, planning can be dicey in the agricultural community. So as we continue to have these discussions about these drafts, finding that line where we have enough protection to meet that requirement and meet the needs of the community, but not so much that things go sideways is I think something we're going to have to figure out as we go.
The warden wants that. You through, Andy? Is that another?
I think so. I could just make a comment. I struggle with a prohibition of topsoil. I think that's a pretty, that's the hammer, right? That's the hammer. And I just think that there's people in that business, and if you cut off their supply of topsoil, they're not going to be very happy.
Go ahead, Robert.
I think what I've seen happen with the topsoil in our area is a lot of good interval soil that was class 2, which the best you get in Nova Scotia, is gone. There's nothing left but a bunch of pit holes where it was dug out 25 years ago, and it's still being dug out in various other intervals. And what happens is that the developer or the person in the business selling topsoil can pay a heck of a lot more for it than any farmer can. It's never going to be worth that amount to a farmer. So I think the answer is you can grow grass in a lot less than class 2 soils. So you can, if the law is there, you can still get topsoil, but you take it off of fields that are class 3 or even 4. You know, as long as you may have to sift it a little bit to get the rocks out of it or something, but there's lots of good soil for growing grass around it without taking our real good interval soil, and as the saying goes, they're not making any more. So once you root that interval all up, I can show you 20 acres and 30-acre fields that are excavated, you know, and it is the very best soil, but it's not what's needed to grow grass for sure. There needs to be a place, yes, to get it, but it shouldn't be coming off the very best soils we got, I guess is my opinion. Thank you, Mr.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. So just on what the warden was saying there in regards to, and he used the example as a pig farm. So if I was a farmer, let's say, and I had beef cattle for 30, 40 years, but it's built up around me, would this stop me from changing if I want? I don't think a person would ever want to go into pig farm, but would this ever change? Would this not allow that? And if it doesn't, then we are restricting agriculture.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. If you were in the rural general zone, which I would hope we've got most livestock operations in, if you're in the rural general zone, absolutely not. Even if you weren't in the rural general zone, if you were to go back to that non-conforming discussion that we had at the very start, you would be a non-conforming use. Changing what type of animal you kept there, I think my interpretation would be that wasn't a change of the use. You're still a livestock operation, so you'd still be under that non-conforming protection. So long story short, probably not. No, I don't think it would impact them. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Warden.
Just on the map there for the agricultural soils overlay map, they are really, like, I found all the maps really difficult to read. Is there some way we can actually either have a good explanation of what we're looking at or get better quality maps?
Yes. Is it just the size of it, or oh, I see. Yeah, because that is covers the whole county on a letter-sized map.
If councilors want, we can print versions. If anybody asks, we can just print it out and people can come and grab it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good idea for the public consultation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Having big maps. Absolutely.
Okay, I guess continue on here.
Okay. So just wrapping up the topic of agriculture here, we also have recognition for hobby livestock farms. It's a smaller scale. It's not based on animal units or anything like that, like some municipalities do. It's just on the size of the building. That way you're not counting animals or anything like that. But there's an ability to have small scale livestock farms in zones that permit residential uses. So, you know, your 1 or 2 horses or your chickens or whatever it is, having an ability to do that anywhere. The last thing, and this often comes up when I have discussions about agricultural issues in communities, is abattoirs. It's one thing to be able to have livestock, the other is having somewhere to process it. They can be smelly, they can be noisy, but they're also important to that community, to the agricultural community. So abattoirs are permitted in the rural general zone in this draft, the rural commercial zone, and the industrial zone. And importantly, it's the use of building structure or part thereof for slaughtering animals, but does not include the slaughtering of game animals for personal use or small-scale on-farm processing of livestock. So, there are limits where abattoirs can go. It's mostly the municipality where they can go, but there are limits. And even outside those limits, if there's a small, it's not stopping a farmer from processing their own. If you're a hobby farmer and you're processing a couple chickens or whatever, it's not stopping that, nor is it stopping your deer processing from your hunt or whatever. So,
Go ahead, Warden.
When we talk about butchering animals, I can't help but think of the battle we went through probably 8 years ago now with Mr. Fraser's property in Millbrook, and there was a large public uprising from that when they said he shouldn't be allowed to butcher anymore, and he had butchered there for probably 40, 50 years without anybody having a problem. And there's a lot of provincial regulations for sure on that type of stuff, but again, he's been there for a long while, and you know, other than that one outburst, which they did a lot of rejuggling after that and switched it to different government departments and everything else, but in the end, he stayed there due to public demand, I guess, and I'd hate to see anything we do here to cause that eruption to come again. The West River Fire Hall and other places were just absolutely packed with protests against what the province was doing to him. And, you know, I know other abattoirs in our area that have been built since, new ones that have to come up to every regulation, but you got to be very careful when you start looking at, you know, and again, this grandfathering should cover that, I would hope. You know, that the last thing we need to do is tell people who have run a good business for a long time that, you know, that they're no longer allowed in our county. So I think the grandfathering is the safety factor there, and I hope it's adhered to.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Environment. So we heard a desire to protect nature, particularly beaches and sensitive environments, desire for environmentally friendly industries, development projects, and tourism initiatives, and we did hear concerns about coastal erosion and flooding when we did the initial engagement. When we discussed this back in early in the year, you know, coastal issues were high on the discussion topic. At the time, there was going to be a provincial-wide approach, and currently we're not in that situation. There's a desire to protect the natural areas and have those a sustainable community. So the drafts touch on the environment in a lot of ways. One is first to permit conservation uses in all zones. It's not something we want to get in the way of. We want to permit it. So making sure that's allowed everywhere. And then, as I mentioned, the minimum horizontal buffer. So this is a horizontal setback, and it's from the ordinary high water mark of inland watercourses and the top of the bank on marine, so in the ocean. And this horizontal buffer has two purposes. One is, especially on rivers and lakes, is to protect that riparian zone. We can't prohibit people from clearing it and all that stuff, unfortunately, but we can stop them from building a building in it. You know, these are the areas that are important for filtering water quality, for being spawning grounds for fish, and all of those things. And on the coast, the main purpose is for erosion, especially, you know, Northumberland shore, especially large issues with erosion over the years. There is, you know, recognizing that these numbers aren't applicable everywhere, there is an ability in the draft to reduce those numbers to half them, so 7-ish meters on inland and 15 meters on the coast, with site-specific review, basically making sure that there's no erosion risk in those areas. The other thing is that there's an ability to, on existing lots that are too small to accommodate a building when you apply this buffer, you know, if that 15 meters or 30 meters is eating up most of the lot, there's an ability for the development officer to reduce other setbacks. So you could be closer to the front, you know, to the road or something like that, so you could still fit a building on the lot. And there's also exemptions in there for the developments that need to be at the water, boathouses, marine industry, all those, you know, all those things that you want to be on the water, so they're exempt from that setback. There is currently, as I mentioned, no vertical setback. There's no consideration in these documents currently for sea level rise. That is a discussion we could have, or it's also something, as I mentioned, that the province is working on example text that municipalities can take at a later date and put into their documents. Wind turbines, you have a current existing bylaw that is not changing under this draft proposal. They'd still be subject to that bylaw. Solar collectors, accessory, so that would be like secondary to another use on the land, supporting that use. Solar panels on your roof or on a farm or whatever would be permitted everywhere as an accessory use. grid scale solar, like as a commercial project where you're building solar farms, are recognized and permitted in many zones. Not so much in serviced areas. You know, they take up a large amount of land, and we want to use those sewer for uses that need sewer. Solar does not. So, you know, promoted more in the rural areas. And then recognizing that we don't know what's to come in the world of energy innovation, there is a policy there for other renewable energy or other energy systems that aren't wind or solar to be considered via the development agreement process. So if a new technology pops up and someone's proposing it, you can consider that as a council through that process. So again, electrical vehicle charging as an accessory use is exempt from a development permit. They might still need to get electrical permits and all that sort of thing, but we're not going to restrict where they go if you're having a charger with a hotel or at your home or whatever. Okay, so the other big environmental topic, of course, I touched on this earlier with the statement of provincial interest on flood zones. East River is one of the mapped floodplains under the Canada Nova Scotia Flood Damage Reduction Program. So we have to, under the statement of provincial interest, prohibit most uses in the 1 in 20 year floodplain and not allow outside fill into that floodplain. In other words, not shrinking or not increasing the amount of land that's in that floodplain or reducing the amount of space for water. It really doesn't affect much in reality. It's a fairly small area within the municipality. It's mostly areas of people's property that are undeveloped, but certainly worth looking at the map. And realistically, that 1 in 20 year floodplain is probably not a 1 in 20 year floodplain anymore with climate change. These maps are 40 years old at this point. So that may need to be updated in the future, but for now, it is what it is. The other thing is the floodway fringe overlay. So again, this isn't a separate zone. It's an overlay that goes on top of other zoning, and it's applied to the 1 in 100 floodplain from the 1970s of East River, and both floodplains, 1 in 20 and 1 in 100 of the River John. In this overlay, what's permitted is dependent on the underlying zoning, but that development must be flood-proofed. And that says scrap yards, I should say scrap yards. Hospitals, industrial uses, residential institutions, so like nursing homes, warehousing and scrap yards are prohibited in that overlay.
Ian, we have a question, Councillor
Yes.
Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you be more specific of what particular parts of the East River that applies to?
So it actually shows up on the zoning map of the land use bylaw, which is page 63, right at the back. There's a big D-sized map. Oh, right, because it's printed little. Okay, yeah. So it basically extends down extends from New Glasgow down to the bridge in Eureka. Yeah. And it's also like the towns have zoning in their parts of the East River as well, but. Yeah, it got printed. It came out a little tiny on the, yeah. It's a D-size map, yeah. Yeah.
Councillor Bailey?
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just on the, I wasn't aware there was a floodplain in River John, but where does that entail? I've never seen too much flooding.
Yeah, and it really, so the province recently did mapping. The province is doing a program, the municipal flood line mapping program or something it's called. River John was one of their test cases, and eventually the goal is to have all major waterways in the province mapped under that program. So municipalities will actually have to come back and put restrictions on other major rivers. But on the River John, it's very little. The biggest, like in River John itself, almost nothing in the community. Further south of River John, there's a low-lying area that's within that overlay, but it's fairly minor. on the river. There's a map on, again, it's probably really small on your printout, but it's Schedule B of the land use bylaw.
Okay, Councillor Wharton.
Thank you. We have Sinclair Island in my area that floods practically every year. Are they built into any of this, or?
Sorry, say that again?
Sinclair Island, they flood practically every year. They're cut off from the rest of the harbor. Do you know if they're covered under this agreement?
I don't know off the top of my head. Okay. So as part of that municipal floodline mapping program, as that as that data comes in from the province.
From the province? Okay.
Yeah, you'll have to go back and,
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. And finally, source water protection. So you get your water from the towns, and a lot of the source water for the towns actually extends into the municipality, whether that's watersheds for surface water or well fields for municipalities that have wells. So New Glasgow, Stellarton, Trenton, and Town of Pictou, all of their source water areas extend into the municipality. Historically, these municipalities, the towns have not had implemented land use controls in their well fields through land use planning, mainly because you haven't had planning as a municipality, so there hasn't been that tool there to do that. They have some of them are protected through source water protection areas, provincially designated. Some of them aren't protected or are only protected in parts of the town. So for now, there aren't any specific land use controls in the source water areas. There's no zone for those areas or anything. What we've done is there's a map in the municipal planning strategy, and anytime you get one of those discretionary applications, rezonings or development agreements for high-risk uses, industrial uses or that kind of thing, or if you get rezoning proposals for the industrial zone or rural commercial zone, we have a policy in that plan that you'll refer them to the towns for comment, and that you'll consider those comments in your deliberations over the appropriateness. So if you get a proposal for a dry cleaning chemical manufacturer in the town of Pictou's well fields, you could turn it down on the basis that it's a risk to their well fields. And then there's also in the municipal plan a recognition that the towns may want to discuss with you in the future, now that you have planning documents, specific land use controls, and that you're open to working with them in those instances. Okay. Getting close to the end here. Recreation, tourism, and transportation, kind of group these together, though tourism's an odd one out. We heard the need for better travel connectivity, improved active transportation infrastructure, and better public spaces. We, in discussing this, looking to minimize barriers for individuals not participating in recreation, and opportunities to collaborate with community groups. So what the drafts propose is in the municipal planning strategy side of things, policy support for including the recommendations of the new active transportation plan in municipal operations. I think there's some work to do. We need to go back now that that plan's further along and make sure we're aligning with the active transportation plan and the municipal planning strategy. There is policy support, and this is one of these things. A lot of things to do with infrastructure are actually done through the subdivision bylaw and through your municipal specs, infrastructure specifications. So these documents currently don't change these things, but there's policy support if you want to do this in the future through your subdivision bylaw, excuse me. There's policy support for requiring sidewalks on new public roads in service centers, serviced areas. Again, this isn't a must, but it's something, there's support there for it if you want to have that discussion in the future. Similarly, for prohibiting new private roads in sewer serviced communities. And then also policy support for establishing minimum standards for private roads to avoid some of the challenges that you've had. And again, we'll provide some recommendations as part of our scope of work, but any of those changes would be through future amendments to the subdivision bylaw. We also permit trail uses in all zones, same as parks and recreation uses in most zones. From a tourism perspective, accommodations are permitted in most zones. A big one that comes up in planning discussions I have a lot of the time with the public is RV parks. It's one of the reasons I often hear people wanting planning. But also lots of people take advantage of RV parks, so it's one of those polarizing issues. We've defined an RV park as more than 3 RVs on a property, and it's permitted in the P1 and P2 zones. Those are the recreation zones. Large-scale recreation uses, outdoor recreation uses like golf courses would go in the P2 zone. And then those outdoor recreation uses that could be especially, have the potential to have conflict with neighboring uses, shooting ranges and racetracks, there would be that development agreement process, that public council discretionary process. Any questions?
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Deputy Warden. Through you, my question is, I notice the popularity of RV parks is becoming more and more, and I think that especially people that are, I know in my district, and especially along the shoreline, that it has become something that, there's an opportunity for. So when you say P1 and P2 zones in the rural general area, can you kind of explain that to me just so I have 100% clarity on that? Because I think that will be something that will come up, especially in District 3.
Yeah, so those P1 and P2 zones, we've applied them to any existing recreational assets that we could identify. So parks, but also things like RV parks, golf courses, all those things. If there was a desire for a future RV park and it wasn't in one of those zones, if it was in the rural general zone, for example, they would have to come to you as a council and request a rezoning to one of those zones, to the P2 zone probably. They would apply to the municipality, it would come to council, it'd be a public process, and you would have that decision on whether to rezone or not.
Okay. I expect this issue to come forward.
I imagine
Absolutely.
it will.
Thank you.
Yes, I expect it will.
Just sure.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. The last one on there, the outdoor shooting range.
Yeah.
As we're going forward with this stuff, anything that was there already is grandfathered, right?
Correct.
So that would look after the Riverton one that's there since the 50s or early 60s?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead, Ian, I guess.
All right, and last topic here is,
Warden does have one, I guess.
sorry.
Going back to the interchanges.
Yes.
This is always a big item when a new highway goes through and suddenly there's interchanges available.
Yep.
At very high prices usually. But the one that went through Salt Springs years ago cut right through the farm fields because there was a lot of debate over where it should go. And finally, the farmer got a lot of money to let it go through his land, so we did lose a lot of good agricultural land there because they had no choice.
Yep.
So if there's a case where an interchange, new interchange is built, farming or agriculture is not listed, if it's good agricultural land there, and oftentimes it will be, is there anything to prohibit a farmer, if that wasn't part of his land before, other than cost of purchasing the land, is there anything to prohibit him or her from farming on that land as opposed to a service station or a restaurant?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So the farming itself, there'd be nothing in these, you could crop that field or, because we don't regulate that.
Prohibit them from doing that.
No, they could, if they wanted to have an agriculture related use, like wanted to open a feed mill or something, the C2 zone, the highway commercial zone, doesn't permit that. So if it wasn't already existing, they wouldn't be able to put a new one in the C2 zone.
I'm thinking more just farming the land.
Yeah,
as
there'd be
opposed
nothing to stop
okay,
that.
Just because they're not listed there
Yeah.
along with what is listed for that zone.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Okay. So finally, economic development. We hear a desire for a balanced economy and good jobs and good opportunities, basically. So when we discuss this initially, having flexible options for commercial and industrial uses, reflecting Pictou's mixed-use history and industrial history, and recognizing and supporting the value of resource-based industries. So what that looks like in terms of practice in the drafts.
Just for a second, Ian, we have a question from Councillor Bailey.
Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Just going back to agricultural for a second, and it might have been said and I missed it. What is being classified as agriculture? Is that land being used for agriculture?
Yeah.
And/or land that could be used for agriculture?
So, through you, Mr. Chair, the Statement of Provincial Interest defines agricultural soils or agricultural lands as lands that are in Class 2, Class 3, or actively farmed Class 4, as well as specialty crops, orchards and blueberries, as agricultural land. So that does capture land that isn't necessarily actively farmed. You could have Class 2 soils, Class 3 soils that aren't farmed, and they would be under the Statement of Provincial Interest, would be considered agricultural lands that we are required to protect. That can be a good thing in the sense that we're setting aside that resource for future use. It also brings up concerns that not all good soils are good agricultural land, in the sense that maybe the climate's, maybe it's next to the coast and the climate's terrible. So that is kind of a challenging part with the Statement of Provincial Interest, if I'm honest. So economic development, again, a reminder that municipal planning documents do not regulate resource activities. You can tell this comes up for me a lot. We're not going to tell people where they can plant crops. Resource-related uses, things like sawmills, feed mills, all of those things, we make space for them in the industrial zone and in rural zones, so the rural general. So again, much of the municipality, it's possible to do those resource-related uses. We also have a provision that storage of equipment related to the fishing industry, such as lobster traps and nets, is an accessory use in all zones. I know lots of fishers keep their boats or their traps on their property, and that could be seen as a commercial use, and we want to make sure that it's an integral part of the industry and that's recognized. Again, farm, fish, and forestry stalls are exempt from permit requirements. We've taken a relatively flexible approach to commercial uses in the rural general zone. It does allow a lot of commercial uses already, so again, commercial is permitted at a variety of scales in most of the municipality. Some of the more intensive commercial uses, like auto sales, would require specific commercial zoning and wouldn't just be permitted in the rural general zone. Go ahead. Sorry.
Mr. Chair, could you explain to me what farm, fish, and forestry stalls mean? I don't know what that means.
So that's, through you, Mr. Chair, that's the little farm stands that people put up, and or the guy selling fish on the side of the road. So we've termed it as an encompassing term for all, those little stalls that stands. Yeah. Yeah. These documents do not have minimum parking requirements. You see that a lot in planning documents, that they require X number of parking spaces for dwellings or hotels or whatever it is. We have not put these in there, partly because you haven't had planning for all this time, you haven't had parking requirements, and people have sorted it out by and large, I would say. If somehow parking becomes a challenge in the future, you could certainly revisit it. But in the spirit of light touch, we have left them out of these documents and left it to the landowner to figure that out. There is a provision in there for flexibility for reusing, adaptive reuse of former institutional buildings. So we see things like churches, for example, that have been deconsecrated and need a new future. And one of the ways to do that is make sure they can be reused for other purposes. So there's a policy in there that allows you as a council, through the development agreement process again, that kind of discretionary process, to think of new uses for or sorry, to consider proposals for new uses of former institutional buildings. You know, I think of Church Brewing in Wolfville, for example, as one of, or the library in Kentville as great examples of former institutional buildings that have new uses that are a little bit different. And then finally, we have a provision for home-based businesses. There's 2 tiers, so it's a little more restrictive in sewer-serviced residential areas like the residential community zone. You could do things like haircutting or dance classes or whatever, but more intensive things. I actually have to look at what the difference would be, but I think like auto repair would be reserved for the rural areas. What's the difference here? Yeah, auto repair is a big difference. Forestry-related uses, repair shops would be permitted as a home-based business in rural areas, but not necessarily in the residential community or the shoreline zone.
Here we have a question from Council.
Thank you, Deputy. Just on the parking, you
Yes.
said no minimum park requirements. Now, in the bylaw, automobile parking area standards, okay? You have no more than 4 parking spaces shall be located in front of the yard of any dwelling.
Yes.
What's the difference here?
Yeah, sorry. I should clarify that. So we don't, usually what you see in a lot of bylaws is that like we tell you how many parking spaces you have to have. It's like if you need 1 parking space for dwelling unit, or you need 1 parking space for every 300 square feet of a restaurant or whatever, like we set out how many you have to provide. We haven't done that. There are some basic standards in there for if you're building a parking lot, it's got to be hard surfaced. If you pave it, you need to identify the parking spots. And then, that's right, no more than 4 parking spaces in the front yard of any dwelling.
So is that any residential dwelling?
Yeah, and I'm thinking I should flag that should be in the serviced areas realistically, because very often you're going to have large parking areas in.
Well, I'm just thinking of my place, like when my kids are home, I get
Yeah.
5 or 6 cars, right?
Yeah.
And I'm grandfather. No,
Yeah.
I know. I'm not yet. But I'm just thinking as future people
Yeah,
build. Like,
absolutely.
You got 3 kids and 2 adults. There's 5 cars there, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I just don't think that we should put a limit on the parking.
Yeah.
The other thing was, in this draft, it says home-based businesses like automobile repair shops, 3 or fewer automobiles at one time. Now, my father was a body man, and I know 3 cars is not realistic because you wait for parts and things like that, so that, you have 2 or 3, 4 cars in the yard.
Yeah.
You might have 2 or 3 cars in the shop. So I just don't think that we should be putting limits on something that's going to be in the rural area especially, right?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, and certainly, that's as a home-based business. Automobile repair is also permitted as a main use in the rural general zone, for example. So if you're at the scale where, you were doing a garage, you could do that as a main use and not as a home-based business. And so you wouldn't.
So it would be a commercial,
Yeah, then it'd just be a commercial use
but it's in the general zoning.
yeah, exactly.
So
So yeah, the home-based businesses are like that.
This would be if it's in a residential area.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, or is it, accessory to your house, you're just doing it out of your garage
Okay.
sort of thing.
Yeah,
But if you were gonna open a business, a full-scale business, then that's permitted as well.
And the other thing, just if I may, it's also in this here, there shall not be more than 2 driveways or ramps from any lot to any one road, okay? Now, I know in the rural areas, somebody might have 2 driveways, but they might have another driveway going into a field, but it's all one lot. Right, they could have 2 accesses to the residential place,
Yeah,
but just down the road from them, they might have another access to a field,
right.
but it's all one lot,
Oh, okay, interesting.
so. think
Okay.
you'll run into that.
It's good to
more
know.
common in the rural areas, right?
Okay. Okay, I'll flag that.
Okay, thank you.
Question from Councillor McDonald?
Just one thing I heard there tonight, very regularly, take it back to council, take it back to council, take it back to council. Are we putting more and more pressure on the council to make decisions like bang, bang, bang all the time?
It's a good question. Through you, Mr. Chair. We've tried not to as much as possible, in that, by and large, most uses in this bylaw, and again, I encourage you to go through the tables, most uses are just permitted, and that will be a staff level thing. You come to staff, you're in the right zone, you meet the standards, you get your permit. And we've deliberately tried to keep it that way, both out of respect for your time, but also out of respect for the applicant's time, because that council process takes time. You know, it's you gotta come to council, you gotta go through a public hearing, all of those things, and that takes time. So we've tried to permit, by and large, most things just be permitted. There are, if you look at that table, there are some things, and I've mentioned a couple tonight, that are by development agreement, and that would be a council process. And then there's also those situations where if someone needs a rezoning, and again, you know, because the general commercial zone, or the rural general zone is fairly wide open, I'm hoping those rezonings will be few and far between, but you will get them. They will require council input on that. And a lot of the work's done at the planning advisory committee level first, typically. You know, applications, the nitty gritty of the applications would go through the planning advisory committee, who would sort out all the issues and then make a recommendation. But that's not to say you won't sometimes get hot public hearings, for example. You know, that it will happen. It is one of the realities of having planning, for sure.
Okay, Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Sorry about that. I just see that we're at the end here. And reading through this bylaw, I've noticed that a lot of, and this is more probably for CAO, it mentions the development officer, development officer, development officer. He's going to be a very busy man if he's going to be looking after every building permit that comes in that door. Does this mean that we'll hire more development officers, or will our building inspectors have more put on their plate to say that that lot does conform to our bylaw and that moving forward, right? Because this would be for moving forward, every permit that comes before the municipality, it looks like the development officer will have to say yes or no, it conforms.
I don't think we can give you a definitive answer at this point. One of the things we look at is, Ian has said, a lot of things are by as of right, so you're just ticking boxes and moving the application along. Where you get into some of the development agreements, things like that, we may get to a point that we need additional staffing resources. But until we're in really to the nitty gritty and seeing how it practically rolls out, I don't think we can say, yes, there is another position, or no, there's not.
I think the past few years we've processed approximately 100, little over 100.
Turn your mic on,
All right. I'm just saying, over the last couple of years, we've been processing a little over 100 subdivision applications per year, and as well, you know, not too many, but a number of zoning clearance letters. Some of that is to do probably with the investment that we've seen in the area, the growth and people moving back that we've seen in the area. Whether or not those carry on as ongoing trends, we'll see, but that's how we've been spending most of our time. So one item that we had addressed with Upland early in the process was that we would be looking, same as with the other items on private roads and things like that, we'll look to come together on some general recommendations and possibly even some ongoing support at the end of this project, depending on how things are looking for those services. But I think, like Brian said, it's kind of premature now, and it all depends on, you know, if we're all of a sudden processing 200 subdivisions, then we really know we're getting crunched for time. But if we're going down to 50 subdivisions, then maybe we're freeing up more time. So it's really something that I think we need to look at, like any other staffing exercise, is what's the demand look like, and how effectively are we rolling out the program. I'm done.
Just on that, like a subdivision to me is when you're subdividing a building lot, right? But if somebody's coming in here with just one lot and they want to put a building on it, so it's not going through a subdivision plan.
No, we already work with the building officials on that when we need to.
So, that's my point. So somebody comes in with something very simple, that it's just a 2.5 acre lot in a residential area. Will it go to the development officer, or will the building inspector be the one to be able to say, yes, that meets all the criteria for that zoning?
If they're looking at, the development officer would have to say if they're zoned appropriately, but for their setbacks and other building considerations, they need to see the building officials on those things. So if they're gonna build a brewery, then they might not be able to.
Yeah, no, I'm just talking a plain residential, single family dwelling. If they're coming in here, then it's a building permit.
It does become a two-step process. The first one is Randy Palmer wants to build a house in rural zone.
Yep.
Yes, no. Does it conform? Yes, no. Done. Over to the building inspectors, and your permit is now in the hands of them because you've met the zoning
I just think
requirement.
that, I know it might be premature at this time, but I can see it being, more people need to be hired in order to get this process through. Especially, I hear people saying how slow it is to get a building permit, and how things now, it's even going to get slower have to go through a development officer. So I just think that we're creating more red tape too. So.
Okay, Andy?
One of the things I've wished we've had as far as information as councillors for a long time is I'd like to see some kind of illustration by a map on where buildings are being built in the municipality. I have, and it would sort of guide me just to say, okay, we're doing a good job, or is it just all the developments getting done up on the coastline, or are we actually building affordable homes in residential communities? I don't have any sense of that, and it'd be quite helpful. Like, there's big dollar values going on right now with some of the building permits we're issuing, but are they a small group of, or is there a whole bunch of $200,000 or $300,000 homes? Or are they? I just don't have that as far as context. I don't know what's happening out there now in our municipality. We get reports every month, but they're bar graphs. They don't illustrate anything. I don't know.
We can include that in our, we have the tools to include warehouses that we built. We wouldn't necessarily say
You wouldn't have.
valuations there, but.
Well, I'd like to know that, because we report that information on valuations. I'd like to have some sense of the value of where the properties are being, plus, is it a single-family unit, is it a cottage, is it a garage, or whatever it is, but I don't have that as context as to what's going on presently.
Okay, we'll take that under consideration, see if we can get that changed or something new. Okay.
Okay. So, that is the long and short of the highlights of these documents. Certainly encourage you to read them in full, and flag any further questions or comments that you have for our future discussions. And and certainly you'll be hearing comments from your residents as well. So the next overall steps in the process, and something that I always do emphasize, that these are capital D drafts. We've put forward our best effort at what we think reflects what we heard and what your needs are. But they're not set in stone at this point, and they never truly are set in the stone. As I mentioned earlier, planning documents are flexible, but right now we have drafts, and they are draft. We will be taking those out to the community through a series of community meetings, an opportunity for online feedback. We'll be notifying neighboring municipalities about the drafts and also getting early eyes on them from the province. We're going to take all that we hear in the draft engagement process, and we'll summarize all of that and bring it back to you for a bit of a policy direction workshop. We'll say, oh, we heard X about agriculture. Here are your options for how we respond to that. Change this, change that, or keep it the same. We'll have a list of all the things that we could change about these drafts and options for them and what we heard, and probably have recommendations. And we'll sit here in this room and we'll go, how do we want to deal with that? Option 1, 2, 3, boop, 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 go through each topic like that. We'll take your direction from that workshop. We will update the drafts, and then you, as a council, have a formal adoption process that will assist you in. There's another opportunity for public engagement through the public hearing. It's much more formal. And then you vote on the documents. Once you've adopted whatever the ultimate documents are, we send those off to the province for review against those statements of provincial interest. They make sure that we're meeting those statements. And then they go into effect. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have some recommendations for you in terms of some of those administrative needs, some of those other bylaws, like the subdivision bylaw, and addressing some other challenges or aligning those documents with what came out of this. In terms of that draft engagement, we currently have scheduled 6 community meetings starting next Tuesday. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday the following week, and then Tuesday, December 3rd. I understand that those nights, the 27th and 28th, conflict with the NSFM conference. We have to discuss what that means for us in terms of scheduling.
Warden has a question.
It's based on just that, on those meetings, that they're not good for counselors because we're being torn both ways.
Yeah.
And you could say, well, this is for the community, you don't need to have the counselors there, but if the counselors aren't there, it's looked upon by the public a lot of times as, well, my counselor didn't even care enough to come, and yet we're, expected to attend the NSFM meetings in Halifax at the same time. So I don't think that's the appropriate way on that 27th, 28th ones. We did move one last week, I think, for the provincial election. Those other 2 should be moved, so we're not put in that position of councillors. I've even heard some councillors say, well, I'll drive back from Halifax to go to the meeting and drive back to Halifax. That doesn't make sense neither. So I think we have to do something about those conflicting dates of the 27th, 28th. And I don't know what your guys' schedule is, but we need to have those dates freed up, I think.
Yeah, we're a bit pinched in terms of it's post-election and everybody's doing everything. But I will absolutely discuss that with my team and find some dates that we can work around that, because, we don't want to, we do want to have council. We want you there to hear, and I should say that, and broadly, not just those 2 nights, but all of those nights. I very much encourage you to come to these meetings to hear what people have to say about these drafts. It helps hearing it firsthand. We'll summarize it all, of course, and have the feedback as in our reporting, but it does help to get the temperature of the room and hear what people are saying firsthand. And so I do encourage you to come out to these, at least one of these meetings in your district or neighboring district, or more if you can. But I'll take that back. And
Ian Swan has a question.
Yeah.
I guess, there I am. Could you just give us, are the meetings going to be similar to what they were, or is there a different format this time?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it'll be similar to the first round. It'll be a boiled down version of tonight, that to make it not take 2 hours. Basically, again, a high level summary of what people can expect out of these documents, an opportunity for people to ask questions and provide early feedback, and then also pointing people towards, we're going to have these meetings, and then the engagement will be open through December. So, encouraging people to take what they've learned at the meetings in the high level, go back and review the documents in detail and provide ask us further questions or comments as needed.
They'll be able to go through the website again, will they, for comments, that type
Yeah.
of thing? Okay.
Yeah, so we do have the next slide there. We do have the project website, imaginemopc.ca, and the project email. When you are out talking to your constituents about this project, please make sure that we do hear the feedback that you hear. Either encourage them to go on the website and fill out the form or send us an email, or if they are not willing to do that or can't do that, certainly encourage you to go on and make sure that that information gets reported and recorded so that we have it. You know, there's a form up there that people can say, here's what my comment is, here's the specific section that it refers to if applicable. They can check a box to have us follow up with them on the comment. Because if it's recorded and all in one place, we'll make sure we don't miss it. So that will be available as well. The one other thing is we're just finalizing some fact sheets. I think the final draft was this afternoon. I have to review them tomorrow morning, and then we'll get those live as well. That kind of provide a high-level summary for people who don't want to read the whole documents, but might pique their interest on certain topics.
Okay, we've got 3 councillors want questions. Randy, you're first.
Sorry about this. This is something I had marked down that I was going to ask about, and I forgot. It was on the flip side of another page.
Fair enough.
Signage.
Yes.
That's a big issue. The province tried to implement that back probably 10, 15 years ago. In the 11th hour, they pulled her. And it was all set to go, and the public outcry was very large. So the government pulled their horns in and dropped it. Is that something, the road that we want to go down? And plus, if we go down this road, who's going to be the one that's going to police this?
Yeah.
Right? Because if you go in the rural area, there's a lot of signage and that. So I just think this is something that we should look at removing and then maybe implementing something easier within time, right? So.
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Chair. So there's a signage section of the land use bylaw, section 9, or chapter 9. It is fairly basic, and importantly, it doesn't regulate in the right of way. You know, the provincial highways or whatever, any of that, like.
No, and the provincial highway was the same, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this would be more for like signs on buildings and stuff like that, and there's some basic provisions. But we've kept it fairly simple, but certainly something we can discuss as well.
But is it something that we have the resources to police too, right? That's the other thing, right?
That's a fair question.
It's one thing about having it, it's the other thing about enforcing it too,
Yeah,
so.
absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Good point.
Logan, I think, was next.
Yeah, my only point, and again, not sure if my mic's. Oh, it's working. It's just, we've been encouraging people in the business community and the community groups to get back to us. So I sent the documents off last week to folks in the business community who had reached out to me previously, but I really encourage you to get out to people on those, and people like land developers and surveyors and people like that too. We'd like to have their input as well, because this really affects those types of people.
Okay, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is in alignment with Logan's comments. How do we reach the people that we want to have at these meetings, to come to these meetings? It's not only the residents we want to have, but we want to have developers, and we want to have people that are engaged in all those aspects of what you stated in the bylaws. So my question is, how do we reach those people to get them to our meetings? So do we have a plan? Do we have a strategy to do that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So the most recent municipal newsletter, this did go out in it. We have an email list that people have been able to sign up to, so we'll make sure that goes to that as well. Just looking back, we did have a stakeholder list in the first round of engagement, so we'll reach out to those stakeholders again. I think it was about 30 of them. I can't remember. I'll have to go back and look who was on that list. But I do also you know, I always encourage, I rely on you as well as kind of the people in the know in your communities. You know who's who. Certainly encourage you as well to make sure that the people who need to be in the room know about it in your districts, because you know that better than I do.
No, exactly. So
Yeah.
do we have a strategy from our communications department in regards to signage? Perhaps we can get signs that we can put up in convenience stores or community halls. Do we have a media strategy in terms of reaching out on the radio or Facebook? Can you give me an overview of that, please?
Yeah, so I'm working with Ryan from ENC there, just doing some, I guess, scheduled social media posts throughout. We can certainly do ads and posters for the community centers as well. But yeah, we've been publicizing it on website, social media, LinkedIn, trying to get those professionals, just different areas. So yeah, it's definitely
On the radio?
not yet, but certainly looked at.
Okay, Warden Parker?
It turned it off, it was on all along. The, just a couple of comments there on, it's fine to have it on all the social media and stuff, and I know a lot of people I know, that's all they advertise on now, but I'm still a believer in radio, that we still listen to the radio, especially early in the morning, see what's happening in the community overnight and stuff, and I think you do reach another group of people that you don't reach on the computer, so I would highly recommend that, and you know, we'll make sure we fill the room with farmers, to make sure things go the right way here, I guess. But I wanted to come back to something that Randy mentioned on the signs. I remember the time when everything was ready to go and we were gonna have only certain types and certain sizes in certain places, and if you drive on PEI, you'll notice all the signs are the same and they're all very orderly at the end of each little side road of what you can see going down that road. But that was not popular here because it's not what's been done over the years. But the one thing I would like to see us do, if nothing else, is to have some kind of law that you've got to take your signs down when you're no longer in business. You see a lot of signs on the road that mislead tourists, especially if they're still in half decent shape, that there's a place to stay down this road or there's a place to eat here, and those signs stay up until they fall down. 20, 25 years sometimes, depending on how well up they are, before they fall down, but it's very misleading to, and it's sort of an eyesore, I think, too, when those old signs are just gradually falling down. So I don't think we can suddenly change the world and have a whole different signing policy, but if the province couldn't do it, I don't think we can. So, but I would like to see us, you know, have something there to get rid of those old signs, some type of penalty if you didn't get rid of them or something. But in a lot of cases, that company or whatever's gone out of business. They no longer exist. So I don't know who you'd go looking for sometimes, you know. It's not going to be easy, but it is a pollution really on our highways. Just a couple of things I want to add, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Just before we adjourn, I gotta say an apology to Mr. Earl Cameron. I forgot to introduce him first. Earl is on our Planning Advisory Committee, and I'm sorry, Earl, you were sitting down there in the corner and I kinda missed you. So if there's nothing else, Ian, that's, okay, if there's no, Joe, do you have one final question?
Will these meetings be televised? Not televised, but no. Okay. It won't be recorded or anything like that?
No.
We don't have a, do we have an online one scheduled? I'm asking you, I should be the one who knows.
Having one that would be like the same presentation that you're gonna have that would be posted online, and then people will be able to feed their comments to it.
Yeah.
But not an interactive one, I thought.
Okay. That is a good question though, and I will talk with Ryan tomorrow in the office about having some way for people who can't make the meetings to get the presentation, whether that's an online option or something like that. Yeah, we did. So,
Also live stream this meeting tonight.
yeah.
Okay, well, thank you everyone very much, and we got a lot of homework to do, I'd say, to talk to your residents and business and read up on all the literature we have, and hopefully this can go as smooth as it can, and thanks Ian for coming and presentation. Meeting's adjourned.